Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me on Social Impact Power Chats.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Amazing. So just to catch everybody up, I met Jennifer through my personal role as a fire survivor. As everybody knows, the Palisades, Eaton, Malibu fire ripped through LA County. And while this is not a club that anybody would want to belong to, as Jennifer often says, it is a club comprised of some of the very best people. And she is part of an organization called After the Fire that really came in after the fire with tremendous expertise and really veterans from all sorts of megafires around the United States to give us advice, which was so needed. And we're now 4 months in. I have learned a lot. There is so much more to learn, but I asked Jennifer to join us for a power chat because I think it's exactly the kind of thinking that I hope people who are in my chair, the folks who are helping to deploy capital right now, can benefit from. So thank you for taking 15 minutes to power chat with us.
Yeah.
Love to just start by, having you set the groundwork about starting this organization. And, really everybody who listens to this is somebody who has a principle of purpose, and sharing with us how coming into the Santa Rosa fire, the Tubbs fire, you were rooted in purpose already, and how that brought you into starting this incredible organization.
So, like many people in this profession, I came to it on accident and by way of disaster. In 2017, my community of Sonoma County, actually, and Napa County, Lake and Mendocino, we had over a dozen massive megafires. And we lost 8,900 structures, 43 lives, and it was really like the first huge one out the gate. And I was working for the county at the time, and when I was asked to lead this brand new organization that sprung up out of the fires, I knew instantly that that's what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to devote my life to really helping my community, which has been so good to me, rebuild and recover. But I didn't know how to do that, and the next year was pretty lonely. I didn't have anybody to call. I didn't have a network of people who'd been through this before. And so when the Camp Fire and the Woolsey Fire happened, that's when I started paying it forward. I said, we don't know much, but we know we're 13 months ahead. Maybe I can share with you what we've done. And then you can skip that part, or you can adapt it, or whatever will work for you. And we found that to be a very powerful model. It's very healing. In about 2020, 2021, there were just so many megafires that we changed from a regional organization into a national organization. And since then, we have responded to virtually every megafire across the United States and built the most robust network of megafire survivors and subject matter experts in the nation, and we pay it forward. We come to communities where it happened.
Amazing. So for the purposes of this conversation, I've heard you speak so eloquently about to fire survivor audiences and giving advice to people who are in my shoes. I'd love to flip the script and think about information that you would share to those who are not in the survivor role, but in the community helper role. The folks who are listening are, folks who work for foundations. They are people in corporations. Everybody wants to take a bucket and help, and we know that that's not as easy as it sounds. So I'd love to hear from your experience. How have you seen donors and doers make a difference? Where are you thinking about, let me rephrase that, how do you think they should be considering supporting community, and what are the questions that they should be asking as they're thinking about rolling up their sleeves or writing checks, both now and for the long term?
I'm so glad you brought this up, because I just briefed about 45 of the funders in LA about a week ago, and this was one of the questions that they had. I really like the fact that people in LA are really thinking long term, more so than we normally see. Usually all the money comes in, or most of it anyway, in the first 6 to 8 weeks, and only about 12% on the back end for long-term recovery. So just when megafire survivors and communities kind of pick their heads up from the trauma and they look around and they're really finding their way through it, all the funding streams are gone. Now you may have held on to some funding, but really sort of the attention, the innovation that needs to come after is not as well funded. So what I really highly recommend is that funders not only look towards the right now, but also towards the very long term. Now I understand that donors on the other side of that can put pressure on funders to, foundations to say, get it out now, or we need this type of collateral. But what we find is that that's not nearly as effective as really listening to the community as you go and partnering with them and figuring out what they need at this time. Long-term recovery for megafires goes anywhere from 5 years to 20 years. It really depends on the community. In the case of LA, we're really looking at about 5 to 7 years, but those are going to be a very robust impact 5 to 7 years. There's going to be massive gaps in insurance coverage and how to get people home. But not only that, how do you get them home safely in a way that's highly insurable? And so my number one recommendation is know the community in front of you, serve the community in front of you. You know, organizations who are coming to you for funding, have they done a landscape analysis? Is there duplication? How are they warding against duplication? Are they collaborating? That's a very big deal. Disaster requires collaboration. You only compete against the disaster. If you foster competition amongst groups, then you actually harm the disaster. And so it's one of those things where a lot of skills that work in other areas simply don't work here. So those are a couple of things. Look long term. Listen to your community leaders. They will actually provide you with the information to figure out what to fund.
I love this idea of collaboration, and I think illustration is always so helpful for these kinds of ideas. Do you have an example you could share? You don't have to name specific brands or foundations where you've really seen a collaborative approach that worked beautifully in, you know, other megafires, or just sort of a model that people could think about as they're coming around the table here in LA County?
So actually, I think in this case, there's a Dixie Fire Collaborative and a Campfire Collaborative, and I'm very happy to name them. You know, those are really rural and a frontier community, and they didn't have a lot of resources, and so what they did is that by definition they had to collaborate, but it ended up being the best tool, especially for Campfire, for this long-term recovery. Paradise is more of a 15-year recovery, so they have a lot of different reasons why, but they're incredibly intentional, very brilliant community in so many ways, and it's, you know, the fact that they've even knit together, you know, a third of their housing stock back, and so much of the vibrancy of their community is actually reborn. I've seen a lot of really good examples of that. There is Hold Dina is actually in LA. That's another collaborative of people who are working together to provide that social underpinning that you really needed before the fire, but especially after the fire. There are many examples of it, but even if they don't exist, funders can actually request it or prioritize it. If you lay those parts of it out, then you're actually going to get more of what you need. Funders actually drive so much of, you know, how disasters play out. I have not always been thrilled about that. I will tell you, I've been encouraged to do other things, you know, in the fire area because my model was difficult to understand, or I don't know if I was explaining it well. I think I was. But I think of, you know, don't be afraid to fund innovation too. Innovation sometimes fails, but innovation is really what moves us forward. With the LA fires, I'm actually really optimistic that we'll get great innovations out of it, and that will help all the other communities that I also serve.
If nothing else, we're a very creative population. There's a not a dearth of creativity in Los Angeles, which is a blessing. So let's talk about, you know, I'm thinking about family foundations, you know, folks who are rooted in LA who want to make a difference. One of the things you and I talked about a long time ago, and this feels 3 months ago, there's so much that needs to be done in a fire, and not to get too basic about it, but there was a story you told me, I think, about fencing. There was some kind of upgrade that was necessary that was not within kind of the regulatory requirement, and it wasn't something that was necessarily insurable, but it was really important. I think it's just such a good essential story for the way funders can think about how to be additive here in the margins. Would you mind telling that story?
Yeah. So much recovery is unsexy. So find the unsexy parts and really make sure that you're looking at a matrix of care, who's already doing what, because funders can also duplicate if you've done a landscape analysis. And the story I believe the story I told you was when our fires happened, everyone went to all the sexy parts, and I went to walls and fences, which was terrible, which was needed, but it's not that sexy. And there was a wall that Coffee Park had that cost about $600,000 to replace. I found the money for it. It was offered to me through one funder in one bulk bit, which was really helpful. And then I went to the community and I said, would you like this, and would you like to design it, and then I'll handle the money part of it? And they said yes. So we all worked together to make that happen. It was one of the most profound projects, actually, because it gave the community a visual deliverable of progress and hope. And it also showed these 1,400 homeowners, these families, that the community at large cared, and they cared so much that they would deliver this really expensive project that nobody wanted to do because it was literally a sound wall, which is it's big and it's beige. It doesn't make for good collateral at all, and it was really important to the well-being of the community. At the same time, I did another one. I did a fence, a mile of common fencing for another 2 subdivisions who had really lost their privacy. People were getting into their cars and driving around and staring at them as they cried over their home. Again, when we were breaking ground on that, what I was most proud of is that for those families, it felt like we were reaching our arms all around them, metaphorically, but it was the fence. I made a short film about it, and I would actually take that on the road and make FEMA people cry over a fence but it's really important to understand that the impact of what fire survivors need is what should dictate how funders and the rest of us respond. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make for great collateral, it matters if it makes for great impact, and that's what we always look for.
100%. So, just to bottom line it, asking the community what it is that they need, being ready to fund things that are not beautiful and not sexy, but really important, and really prioritizing opportunities where there's a gap, right? Like, for whatever reason, this is just an unfundable space, but it's really mission critical. I feel like that is 100% where I'm hoping philanthropy can play. Certainly it's where we're trying to bring our clients. And I love the hug metaphor. As you know, I've named like 7 different things that were a part of hug related things, because it's what everybody needs. And it's that feeling that, the community has your back. So power chats are quick. We're at our last question, which I cannot believe. Just sort of a lightning round. If you had the opportunity to sit across from some folks who are considering funding opportunities, what are the questions that you hope are top of mind as they're sifting through these requests? And, what would you center as you're sort of thinking through allocation?
I think one of the things that, disaster requires innovation, and often funders want to play it really safe and only fund ones that were there before. And I do think that there should be what in Maui they would call like a funder's hui around people who have sprung up out of it, but also to provide them with the support. It's not an easy thing to start an organization after a disaster, but a disaster sort of requires it because the other organizations also have to go back to doing what they were doing before. And so adding that layer of disaster recovery over them might actually be an impossible task for the long term. It's really helpful to have, not a ton of them, but just enough new organizations that can just support the disaster recovery. Like when I took this job, I was asked to give a 5-year commitment. I'm on year 8, and it looks totally different now. Having that sort of commitment and that total focus on just recovery was really helpful. So ask them those questions, and don't be afraid to invest in innovation and you're investing in people. And if you know that they are determined, that's very helpful. And do they have social capital? Social capital, trust, and integrity are incredibly important in all businesses, but in this one in particular. So when people are looking for people to head new organizations, I've been asked for a lot of advice around this, and I say we can teach them disaster. We cannot teach them your community, though. They should already know the community and have social trust and have emotional intelligence and be able to read the room, because the room is always changing. That's really important.
Is there anything else? And we'll cut this part out too.
It's really important that funders think about everything for a minimum of 3 years. And so if you only invest in 1 year for a program or any kind of organization, you can't really get much going inside of that year for long-term recovery. So really look at how can we support that organization or that mission. That program for 3 years is really the minimum. By then you kind of get going and you see proof of concept, but don't expect that in the first year.
Amazing. This advice has been incredibly practical, which we always aim for. And I'll just say on behalf of our family and certainly all Angelinos, we're so grateful that you exist and that you've been doing this very, I don't even know how to describe the work, rough work, tough work for 8 years. It's a huge blessing, certainly for everybody who is a unlucky but very fortunate member of the club that you launched.
Well, I do have a big ask at the end of it, though, which is that for the leaders that I find really effective, I do ask them to go with me to the next fire. So let that sit with you. So thank you for that.
Deal. Well, thank you for power chatting. And we'll include in the liner notes after the fire, if there are people who want to get in touch. I can't co-sign enough the incredible work that Jennifer and her team do. If you're thinking about people from a funding perspective or from an action perspective, if you are a member of the fire survivor community. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily.